When we think of responsible AI, it's easy to imagine it as a protective guardrail, something that keeps AI from making mistakes or causing harm. But what if we looked at it differently? What if responsible AI was less about restriction and more about the potential for transformation, a tool for building a more just and equitable world? My guest this week, Tim Rich, was a product manager who drove responsible AI at Indeed, the world's largest job site. Tim shares his vision of using AI to create a more just and fair society.
As we're putting this in place, I think that you really do see a society. You can see a society that becomes more just and more fair in the way that we treat people, because you're able to highlight maybe a job seeker who really wouldn't have gotten a fair shake if maybe they came in person and they're like, oh, I'm not sure about this person, or I'm not sure about this person. But if we can instead use these systems to say, actually, this person that you may have overlooked is the most qualified, is the person that you're looking for, and they might not fit your paradigm or what you think of as maybe a cultural fit, but they actually have the skills and the passion and all of the things maybe over and above people that you maybe find in your normal network. So I think that when I think about responsible AI and the opportunities out there, that's one of the things that I think is like, I'm not a doomsdayer. I don't think that AI is going to destroy us. I think that we have the ability to kind of go in and make changes to make us a better humanity.
And please don't forget to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Your engagement is what makes this podcast possible. We have several exciting episodes coming up that tackle topics such as AI ethics.
This is the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast with your host, Stephen Walther, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I am so excited today. I have Tim Rich with me, who was the responsible for responsible AI at Indeed. Let me give a quick bio. Tim is a seasoned product manager who led responsible AI initiatives at Indeed, where he spearheaded efforts on inclusive matching and hiring for marginalized populations. Indeed is the world's #1 job site, receiving over, going to be some big numbers coming, receiving over 350 million global unique visitors per month. Using AI technology, more people get hired at Indeed than any other site in the universe. So, hey, Tim, thank you for being here today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Stephen.
So I really I want to dive right in. I'm excited about this whole topic of responsible AI because it covers so many different things. And there's so many, I know, there's all these organizations right now coming out with responsible AI frameworks, Salesforce, Microsoft, Google. Everyone has a responsible AI framework. I just read a paper talking about, trying to categorize the over 40 some, responsible AI frameworks. So I know there's a ton of interest in it right now. And so I guess I'm wondering, like I know you were very central to responsible AI at Indeed, and I was wondering about like what's your background? How did you like get involved in responsible AI, especially considering I'm assuming there's no like standard academic track for people to become like a responsible AI product manager right now because all this stuff is so new. So I'm super curious, what's your background? How did you get involved in this stuff?
Yeah, no, good question, and thank you for having me. I'm really
Yeah.
excited about this. You're right in saying that there isn't a standard framework. There's not a standard thing. There are a bunch of ways that you can learn, but when I was first starting out, there weren't a ton. While I was at Indeed, I was incredibly fortunate to work with and learn from top-notch data scientists and researchers on the responsible AI team who were really academically driven, and they had been studying a lot of this, and so. I joined as Indeed as someone with general AI experience and particular expertise in leading 0 to 1 product initiatives. And I had curiosity and interest in learning more about responsible AI, and I'd done a lot of that while I was at. I kind of piqued my interest while I worked at Microsoft, and so I worked at Microsoft for about a decade, And I was fortunate that most of the work that I did there had some aspect of machine learning or AI as part of it. And my interest in creating fair systems really started with my role in customer success engineering, and this is like 6 or 7 years ago. My team's primary goal was to make sure customers were highly satisfied. And we wanted to create amazing, delightful experiences that drove love and usage of Microsoft 365
Yeah.
through this. So this was both with automated tools and conversations with support agents. And keep in mind, Microsoft 365 is a multi-billion-dollar business with hundreds of millions of users. So the self-help and support volume is massive, and it produced tons of data that we could use to train for machine learning, training machine learning models for things like proposing fixes or routing support calls. And the call routings were particularly interesting. As you can imagine, calls were routed to systems around or to support centers around the world, and we saw trends that would be particularly problematic if we let the system route based solely on the data. As you can imagine, often U.S. customers would rate their experience with customers would rate their experience with people from India lower than people from US or maybe from England. And we would go in and we'd look at the data and we'd say, actually, the experience, like the advice they're giving is as high or higher than some of these rated experiences, and like what's going on here. And really there was this inbuilt bias in the people rating the agents versus the actual experience that they were getting. And we also saw the flip side of this where when US people would talk with people in Britain, in England, they get
Yeah.
this bump. They would love to.
Because
uh,
the fancy accent. They got a fancy
yeah,
English accent. It's like,
we'd say. Um, and and the British people love to talk to the English or to the US people because
yeah.
they were, I feel like I believe everything I'm saying. Funny thing was, if, in England, there's different accents. And so if someone
Right.
from else from England, they would treat them in a similar way as the US would treat the people maybe from India. And
Right.
so this had actually some really interesting business and social consequences if we were to follow this. I mean, you can
Right.
imagine the dollars that would go to one of these places based on this. And so, um, so
So
we,
wait, so I think this is really fascinating because basically what you're saying is the problem here is really just it wasn't a problem on the Microsoft side or of your product. It was really a problem of bias by your customer. So it's almost like, bad customer problem where you don't necessarily want to, you don't want to support that because it's sort of based on bias and it's sort of unfair for hiring different companies if they happen to have a lot of employees from India. You don't want to have any sort of bias against that, but it also has a impact on your bottom line. So how do you that's a really fascinating example. How do you like handle a situation like that?
yeah, so this is, like you're right. Like you have bad data in, bad experience out. And so if we just follow the data and we're like, okay, let's route this, et cetera, um, we have to think about it holistically, and say,
Yeah.
well, why is this bias here, and how can we maybe negate it or overcome it? And because we worked not only on the tools but also with the agents themselves in the operational space, we were able to train up and say, like, what are some things that you like, maybe have better conversations that are more UX centric, and then also we could improve the UX. So we like oftentimes we could give people an option to choose and maybe wait longer to talk to one versus another. That's one option. We could also say, like, this person is an expert in maybe it's Exchange or SharePoint, and we could start to improve the UX to say things like here, this person is like what you'd see in Uber, essentially, where someone has taken so many rides, or they've driven like a
Right.
thousand rides. Maybe they've answered 1,000 questions related to email. So this person might be from a different culture than what you're used to, but they are actually expert in their field, and you should listen to them. So trying to overcome the biases that with other biases, basically saying the
Right.
expertise and other things. So trying to, instead of just relying and saying that this is just a level playing field, and let's just let the data fall where it may. You could re-engineer the entire system to be more fair to people who really should be getting the same shot as everyone else.
That's a really fascinating example. Thanks for sharing. So how did you go from? So it sounds like did a lot of work on Microsoft for a number of years. Customer service. You worked with. Sounds like you were in some sort of incubator 0 to 1 program, helping there, doing a lot of machine learning stuff. And then you end up at Indeed, world's largest, job site. So how did your role kind of change once you came to Indeed? What was like how did you handle that? Because don't want to go on at length here, but I know that hiring is one of the most sort of challenging areas of responsible AI. I know, there's that new New York bill that was just passed that is demanding audits now on all hiring decisions. There's been a ton of like regulations and hand wringing and concerns. So how did you how did you handle thinking about like the regulations and interacting with product teams and yeah, what's it look like to be a responsible AI PM at Indeed?
Yeah, I'd say that the focus that I previously was, when I was at Microsoft, was mostly do building AI products that were responsible. This shifted to be saying like, how do we make sure that all of the AI products we're building are responsible and they're fair and they kind of incorporate the values that we care about and additionally aren't breaking the law. And so I think when I moved from Microsoft, which is more of this platform, and it was about serving the business itself, like making sure that the experience was really great. Indeed was really about thinking through how job seekers are being treated by the algorithms, and with the New York law coming through, and there were others, there were laws across the country and actually around the world. We had to think through that in kind of there were haphazard laws that were coming up all over, and you had to kind of
Yeah.
create a system to say which ones are actually going to be in play. We had to think. We worked with the legal team and and our policy team to track all of these different laws throughout the country and around the world, and say like, what's the impact of this? What are they actually asking to happen? And can we comply with this or not? What's the business risk of not complying if we were to be caught in this? I can't remember the per instance charge, but New York was basically there's every single time someone was maybe for every job seeker that was in New York and was treated unfairly or wasn't in compliance, there would be like a charge for this, and so it could be millions, tens of millions of dollars just in New York, and
Yeah.
true across the country. And so, like creating a risk framework and then using that as a way to say, like, not only are we doing the right thing for job seekers, but we're also the business is able to continue in these places and we're able to be sustainable. And it also gives us a competitive advantage because we're doing something. Because we were actually, I think, Indeed, I got to credit them with being out in front of this. Trey Kelsey is the director there, and he really he started this team early, and he said like let's do this ethically, and then also as the business and the legal needs started to come in place, then he already had a team that was up and running and could go towards this, and so that really I think the ability to say like what's the risk, what's happening on the horizon, and then giving lead time to other product teams across Indeed to understand how this would affect their business, that really set us up for success as we started to do the audits across the business.
Got it. So would it be accurate to say that your role shifted from more of a product role to more of a governance role? Do you taking in more of instead of you're leading, specific products like say you were doing at Microsoft, it's more like you're working within the company to, sort of evangelize or get people familiar with all of these, considerations that are now coming up around responsible AI and to educate the company around that and just to stay on top of everything that's going on.
Yeah, there's both of those things where we had to understand the frameworks and everything that was coming in, as I described earlier. Then we had to educate the company, and we needed to do the audits and work with data scientists, researchers inside of Indeed to do those audits, and also the legal team. And so there was the evangelism, the understanding, the evangelism, and then also the product piece. And the product piece was creating automating tooling and trying to streamline the process of doing audits to evaluate the different models using a standardized process, both getting access to the data and getting approvals from the legal team, and then publishing the results of those audits in a secure environment. So because most of the audits that we were doing are pretty sensitive, because this is labor laws, and they're, we
Yeah.
want the company isn't at risk of saying something or somebody misinterpreting the results of these audits, if whether we found something or not. Like there's often a risk if we publish that data internally, someone might read it one way when it actually meant the other. So especially when you're in these early stages of analyzing data, like you might not be. Sometimes you have data and you're like, what is the data saying? And if
Right.
we publicize it pretty widely, then there's a risk of misinterpretation and then additional risk.
Got it. So that makes sense. So a lot of governance work, but also sounds like because you have to ensure that the different models, the machine learning models used within Indeed, aren't biased, don't have, all the bad characteristics you're trying to guard against. There's also a lot of like driving standard tooling to ensure that, that the audits can be done, but also scaled up across the number of different models you have in the company. Can you tell me, I mean, what's like, how do you like approach, are there standard tools that you use for auditing? Did you have to with these like homegrown tools, or are there ones in the industry now that people are like saying, no, we're all using the Salesforce tool, the Microsoft tool? Or is there some convergence to like standard auditing tool that people are using?
Yeah, we looked at a bunch of different vendors, and like at the time, there really wasn't a lot of these tools in place. And I think that now we're starting to see, like, I know Microsoft does have some auditing tools, and there are all other companies that are pitching similar things that are startups, and but at the time, we didn't have the luxury of adopting those types of tools, and so we all these tools were actually homegrown. They were bolted onto other things, other tools that were in existence already. There were some homegrown, and there's also Indeed uses AWS for a lot of its data. So we had to join this more sensitive data that we have in one area of the company with the public, or more internally public models that existed, and be able to do these audits by saying, like, well, if we put the data, the like demographic data and the results of their these customer interactions, like whether they're hired or not, or what happened in each system, then we would marry that with the data, with the models themselves, and then evaluate what happened, and say, like, okay, this is the result. So it's a mixture of public and private data using homegrown tools that we partnered with internal. We built for some of the auditing tools for in the responsible AI team, and then we partnered with internal teams to kind of integrate with their existing workflows.
I guess I didn't fully appreciate it until you just said that, how tricky it is, because you need that demographic data, obviously, to determine bias, but that's sensitive data. So you also have to be very careful about how much access teams have to it. So that must be a challenging kind of, I don't know, line to walk, where you have to collect that data. You have to be aware of sort of the impact on things. But on the other hand, you also have to be careful about how that data is shared throughout, like Indeed or through algorithms. So, and I always find it like challenging trying to understand how, I mean, like when you're trying to determine bias in an algorithm, I know it's super challenging because I know there's all the issues around like proxies for race and gender, and that, your race or gender can, well, more your race can show up on things like zip codes, first names, I don't know what organizations you're a part of, what part of the country you are. How do you even get your, sort of like, how do you figure that stuff out? I mean, I know this is a giant question, but how are you able to, like, determine which features are actually leading to, unfair outcomes versus other things which might have to do with, just sort of like everything's connected to everything else, and it's really hard to isolate the features that you want to keep out of training the models versus the features that you think it's important to have in the models.
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. I it's there have been examples, and there's a really solid one. And Amazon published this paper a while ago, so it's not talking disparagingly of them, but they built a system where they would take in the resumes from people around the company, basically, and say like, what characteristics of these people, these are the people we hired. Let's find more of those people. And so it was this biased data set. And then when people would apply, they would notice that, oh, maybe you went to a school that was different than these schools. Maybe and really had noticed that the zip code is one thing. Then the like women would go to like a all girls school, or you
Yeah.
might go to historically black college or university. And these, if you think about Seattle itself, is a pretty white demographic, and most of the
Right.
developers are white and male. And so the system over time learned, because it just kind of used the block resumes for that, to disregard the resumes from women, and then also started to learn similarly for other races. And so they discontinued that system. And so the nice thing about Indeed is like the data that we take is in a different format. It's not like wholesale, and we don't just match an entire resume and go from there. We evaluate, when we're doing the evaluations for the models themselves. There's two different ways that you can think about hiring and hiring laws, like disparate impact and disparate treatment. And so when you're going to hire someone, you could treat someone differently based on their demographics, and that's obviously illegal. And then there's also disparate impact, like if someone's in the same situation and they have the same skill sets, and then they're just treated differently because of like maybe not intentionally, but unintentionally, there's these disparate impacts, then that's also illegal. And that's problematic. So one of the frameworks we would use is the legal framework. And so we would go through and say, like, are we, of the published models, or the ones that we're using in the product, what's the impact of this model? And so we could go back and retroactively look at the people who went through a certain system, and then what was their success and failure rates, and we could break out, because we had the demographic data. And again, this is all very carefully guarded and secret, like, and nobody had access unless they had really strong security access. We would, we'd be able to evaluate and say, like what are the reasons that people, like, what are the trends that we see? Are we seeing certain types of people from different countries, or you could see people from different backgrounds, all the different types of demographics you could think of. What was their impact as they went through this flow? And was this a positive or negative experience? And do we see a disparate impact, or like a big delta between one group versus another? And then let's dive deep into that. And I'll be honest, one of the struggles that we had is, as you get down into specific features, sometimes you see a smaller amount of participants, and collecting demographic data at that scale and then seeing the impact of that is sometimes difficult. Like, you really can't make a call unless you have enough data. So like, it's a fine line. I think some people are really careful, and some companies are ultra conservative and they won't collect certain data. And I think that's a strategy that you might want to employ. But if you do decide to start collecting data, then you have to be able to collect it at a certain scale that it's actually meaningful. And so that's something to keep in mind if you're in this kind of situation.
Got it. Yeah, that is interesting. So not having enough data, especially for, I mean, Indeed, I just in the intro talked about how huge it is, how many job seekers are using it. But for a lot of smaller companies, they don't have the luxury of, big enough sample sizes. And so it's going to be much more challenging, I would assume, for them to be able to determine bias or not. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
in this particular way, for sure. Yeah.
interesting. Well, so I'm curious about, like, have you ever been in a situation where you've just had to shut down a team, where you just said, look, This is what you're doing is this is that there's we've uncovered so much bias, or your whole approach isn't going to work, or where, I mean, do you get in situations like that, or is it more like you're constantly kind of like saying, no, you're going to have to change your model a little bit, or you're going to have to, is it, do you ever have to like say, nope, you can't do that anymore?
I'll say that one of the NDAs that I signed can't like talk about like, oh, found this, or
Fair.
I'll say that there is the best approach to take in that type of situation is to work with the teams ahead of time,
Uh-huh.
it's much better to build the thing right than to fix it later. And so evangelizing these concepts and saying like, and having we had monthly coffee and learns across the company where anybody could join. They were really well attended, and then we also had biweekly research readings, so where we'd keep up with the latest research, and we had amazing data scientists and researchers who are PhDs who would lead these discussions, and so like that was one way we kind of got ahead of it. But in the instance where you see something that's problematic, then I think you could you'd basically work with a team and say like, here's what we're finding and here's the issue. It could be a model issue, it could be or it could be a problem with the UX. I think for us specifically, the one of the vectors that we had, or one of the interesting things about the law in New York, at least, is automated systems making decisions about whether to hire someone is very specific in the language. And
Yeah.
so getting shut down most likely would be if you were doing something illegal, and it was pretty provable. And then there's this, and so there's risk, right? Like, so that'd be high alert, red flag. We have to stop. And then there's a gradient of that goes to, we're doing fine, and it's okay. It could be better. And then there's everything's um, green and go. And so if it's more in this gray area, where you would work with a team to say like, what's a better way that we could do this, or we're seeing this model. Is there another model that we could use, or is there other types of data that we could bring in? And with the automated decisions, we basically looked across and said like, are there any systems? Do we do that? Do we actually make the decisions? And most of the time, the answer is no. The the employers are making the final call. There might be specific filters that they could put on and say like, I don't want this, or I don't want this, and it's not necessarily an automated system. It's more of a filter that they've implemented themselves, and then they're making the hiring decision. So I think because of some of the ways that the laws were written, it made it a little more clear cut when something had to be stopped versus when we could make adjustments.
Okay, so there's two things I'm interested in bringing up from what you just said. I mean, the first thing is, if I'm going to try to echo back, I think what I heard, but from what I'm hearing is you're saying, it's really important for, sort of responsible AI to get involved in even the design stages of a product, because otherwise there might be surprises at the end, and you don't want to be in a situation where you get shut down at the end of a major product initiative. But one way to guard against that is to make sure that, sort of like overall there's some sort of design review and so on going on with the responsible AI teams. Am I capturing that right?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think and responsible AI is similar to any other of these initiatives like privacy or security,
Yeah.
where you might have a champion or a team that's really this subject matter expertise, but you need to democratize it. And so hopefully, at the beginning of a stage like this, you do have people who know a lot more than everyone else, and this is the first time anyone's done it. And so having these experts come in and do design reviews and be a part of every conversation is really important. And later on, as you start to have built this muscle across the organization, then I don't think you have to be involved in every single conversation, because like the data scientists and the developers and the product managers have already like internalized the lessons, and it becomes a part of their DNA. And so then maybe it's later on, as you're doing audits on a regular basis, that you could like it's more systematized, and it's but at the beginning, definitely be a part of those conversations to help educate.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess the other thing, so I'm actually I'm interviewing someone who's talking about algorithmic collusion coming up, which I'm excited about. But the idea there is there's a company called YieldStar that sets prices in Seattle, for example, for rent. And they and there's worries that because everyone uses this YieldStar software, that there's some that it amounts to collusion because automatically, all the rents are increased or whatever. And so there's challenges around like thinking because you just brought up like is it the algorithm doing it or is the algorithm just sort of suggesting to the employer what they should do? And that's a line that I'm like struggling with right now understanding because there's a lot of situations where you go to ChatGPT, you get advice from ChatGPT, and the person, makes a decision. Well, I mean, how much of the responsibility falls on ChatGPT versus the person making the decision?
Hmm.
Or in the case of the Yield Star, how much, they claim, well, they're just giving advice for property owners for how much to set the rent, but they're not actually setting the rent. Yeah, kind of. I mean, they're telling it, what's the market, capable of bearing. So they, you could really, raise people's rents that way. There's a lot of situations like that for employers where you're doing things like, ranking candidates or calling out candidates for, that that they're a better match in one way or another. And we definitely don't want to get rid of all of those features. But on the other hand, it also seems a little tricky where you say, well, when does like nudging employers or giving suggestions or where does that cross the line into actually getting into hiring decisions? And that's I don't know. I'm wondering how do you deal with situations like that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I'll say that I'm no longer at Indeed, just to be clear, and I'm not
Yeah.
speaking for. I don't want to get any kind of legal.
Right, right.
Um, but my own personal opinion is so the question about all right, so there's all this data that you could use to make a decision, and how do you nudge someone, and how do you offload some of the burden, right? So if we think about the scenario, and the scenario is there are so many now there's AI that's being used to by job seekers to apply to jobs, and they're
Yeah.
applying to hundreds, and we can see this in the job marketplace where it reminds me a lot of the work I did in my early career, which is working on spam and malware. The first job I had at Microsoft was working on spam and malware and the machine learning for that, and it becomes this arms race of I can now go and apply to hundreds and hundreds of jobs. I may or may not be qualified for that, but I'm just so desperate for a job, so I'm going to try to apply to everything. Then you
Right.
have the that are getting all of this data or all these applicants, and they're like, well, what am I doing? I'm drowning in a sea of this. And so like that, it's actually not good for either party for
Right.
this situation to be the case. So you have to think about it from a systemic level and say, what can we do to make sure that job seekers are applying to jobs that they're qualified for and interested in, and what can we do, and what can we do for employers to make sure that they're seeing those qualified candidates and the ones that are the most qualified and not being screened out by biased algorithms and things like that. And so I think that the kind of the fix to this is to use the types of qualifications. I mean, we talked about skill-based hiring at Indeed. I think that's really important. Starting to structure the data differently, to say like, what can you do? You might like for say, suppose for me as a product manager, I've built all these skills that are applicable not only to product management but also to other fields. And if the job, and maybe if the job seeker or the employer, they say like, oh, he's a product manager, he could never be in marketing, or he could never be maybe like CEO, or he could never like there's all, but you're like, well, actually, as a product manager, I did a lot of marketing, or I did a lot of leading of people and businesses, and so maybe I do have transferable skills to be a CEO, or to be a marketer, or to be something else. And the same is true for if you're talking about a cashier, they have all this customer service, and maybe they'd be good in sales, but they've never done sales, and so trying to understand at a deeper level the qualifications of an employee and a job seeker, and then saying, well, how does that match with my job? I think that those are the types of things you want to bubble up and say, like, this person is qualified in these ways, and maybe there is some lack in qualifications over here, but trying to present the overall candidate as a whole versus and saying and using those as cutoff criterias or criterias for saying, like, they should show up higher in the list than others. And I know at Indeed, one of the things that we found is basically, like, we wouldn't remove anybody from the pool. Like, there was no, like, like, there was an infinite list of people, like, anybody who's applied, you could always find everybody. I think
Yeah.
that was solution that we had versus say, and we would have, but if you have hundreds, maybe thousands of applicants, you can't show them all on one page. And so, like, where do you put them? And I think like, it was really smart, and I can't take credit for this, but to switch to more of the qualifications route and starting to bump up on the page based on those types of things, or answers to questions like, what are deal breakers that an employer says, like, you have to come into the office. If someone's like, I won't go into the office, then you probably can't there. If you say I absolutely, have to be a telework person, then maybe that's, you can only, you as a job seeker only want to see and probably only want to apply to places that are telework or are available in your area. So, like, thinking through versus saying, like, oh, let's go apply to everything. Let's really find what you're looking for, and on both sides of it. And I think that makes for a better employee or employer experience and job seeker experience.
Got it. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, let's say I'm trying to hire a nurse. What I never want to be in is a situation where I just go to like a job site like Indeed or wherever and say, I want to hire a nurse, give me the best candidates, because then, you're going to be flooded with potentially thousands of people who aren't qualified. You want to go to a place like Indeed and ensure that the employer is in the driver's seat and making decisions on the specific skills and qualifications that are important to them. And that way, when Indeed is filtering out, or you said they never truly filter out anyone, they just rank them differently. But when they're trying to show sort of the best kind of matches, it's actually the employers in the driver's seat because they've made the decisions about the most important qualifications for the matches. So it's not the AI is taking over the entire process. That would be dangerous, and it would just be its algorithm going crazy on its own, which you don't want. You want the employer driving that algorithm so they can take responsibility for whatever whoever shows up top in their list. Am I capturing that correctly?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, awesome. I'll take that. Uh, cool. Well, so I have to ask, since the world is super excited about generative AI right now. I mean, I know we've had machine learning for a while. Generative AI has shown up. I imagine, it's comes up in a lot of places for like I'm assuming auto generating things like resumes and even emails that go out to candidates on the employer side. I can see it being used all over the place. Are there special risks that are involved with generative AI that are kind of new for responsible AI, or does it fall into some of the same areas that you were auditing before?
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference. Like, because generative AI, typically when we're talking about for job or jobs, is job descriptions, or maybe when you're emailing candidates or you're having some type of communications, you can imagine that those are the types of scenarios. I know that Indeed has some generative AI in the job descriptions, uh, and how that's really how that's generated is that Indeed has the most job postings. It has all, it scrapes and finds basically all
Right.
job postings in the world. And so it has a pretty good idea of what these job postings should look like.
And it knows which ones are effective. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
it has feedback on what's the most effective job posting to be able to hire, say, a nurse. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think that, like, if we think about the employer's experience, there's maybe I've never written a job description for a nurse.
yeah,
And I'm like, okay, well, these are the things I think. you could imagine they're like, well, let's put this bullet in and this bullet in, and you could talk to different people, and then the job description just keeps growing and growing, and then you're starting to screen out candidates who would be qualified, but you're like, well, this would be nice, this would be nice, this, and then people they kind of opt out because they're like, well, I can't do all of that, and so I think that there's an opportunity for making job not inflating job descriptions and really making it so that you're reaching candidates who are maybe less likely to apply if they weren't qualified for everything, but they would hit the core skills that you actually want. And so there's definitely a positive there. Now with generative AI, what it is probabilistic. So it says like, what's the next word, or it says like, all right, if it says the brown fox runs, what's the next word? It looks across all of the language on the internet that has ever been trained on, and then all these job descriptions, then it makes a guess. And if you're looking at maybe 75% says, the next word in this should be something about, nursing. I can't think of a great example, but it's also 25%. It could be something else. And so it's not going to be the same for every single query that you put in there. And the risk in there is that it's going to make a wrong guess. And this is where hallucinations come into to
Right.
play. Things you see things like on the internet, like they say, like, how do you make pizza? Or you put glue in it.
Right, right. Delicious, delicious glue pizza. Yeah. Right.
This funny answer from Reddit, and it puts and so if you're not careful, you
Right.
don't actually know what the AI will say, and there's a bit of I think there's definitely risks, and you have to be careful to make sure that you're creating guardrails for those risks. And the way that they do that is like post training, or you use RAG, which is basically like saying let's use the model as it's been trained, and then do a double check, and say let's do it like there because models are typically based on historical data, because if you've pre-trained it, that's the case, and then you can have it double check by doing a search of more fresher data, whether that's on the internet or data that you have inside of your data store, and then say like it's basically a sanity check to say, is this actually true? Is this right? And then and if so, then let's go forward with that. I think that's in the hallucination case one, that's one way that it's been that we're mitigating that. There's also again, keeping the user in the center of it and giving them, you wouldn't publish, you wouldn't like, you want maybe the employer to make the final call and say like, this is something I believe in, and I've vetted it, and there isn't glue in the pizza. I think this goes to the philosophical, um, kind of the philosophical alignment of humans and machines. I think that humans are good at some things and machines are good at others, and you want to make humans the best that they can be. And it's shown in study after study. If you have humans making the decisions about, well, aided with AI, the human is going to perform much, much better. Even the experts are going to perform better than they would have otherwise. And so don't let the machine make the final call on some of these. It assists the user up to a point, and then let them publish. So I think from like, is generative AI a risk? For sure. I think there's also a ton of benefits that you can get from this. You're going to see a boost in productivity. You don't have to go and research all of these job descriptions that you might have before. And you can now just say like, okay, well, this is a pretty good guess. This is 80% of the
Yeah.
way. Let me go in and add the things about my company that are really special and really change the game for these people when they come work at my company versus they go work at anywhere. Because you have to think about it as a branding, for these people who are employers. Like, I want to stand out, and I want to attract people who want to work for me and with me. I don't want to just attract anybody. I want somebody who's really passionate about doing the work the job that I'm putting on offer, and so they understand that. So I think that's where the specialness of humanity really comes into play, because you're going to be working with humans. You're not going to be working with bots. You're going to be working with
Right. Well, I don't know. I mean, a couple of years, we might be the last humans
yeah.
left, but
Yeah.
yeah. Well, so I want to ask you, things are changing fast. There's a huge demand right now for people interested in responsible AI. Companies are scrambling to implement these different frameworks. lots of developments going on. I'm curious about what's sort of the most exciting stuff for you in responsible AI. What do you see like what do you get excited about when you're reading studies on responsible AI or you're looking at this stuff? What do you think is the most exciting stuff coming up?
I think that the most exciting stuff is really the part about like why I got into responsible AI to start with, which is if you think back to my original example with Microsoft 365 and all these people around the globe who get rated differently, and there's all this bias, I think that if you have the right people in place, and you have people who care and the incentives are there, I think, and I do think the incentive is there from a business perspective and for other reasons, you can create systems that are less biased than humans generally are, or you can kind of start to root out this bias. You have to be careful. You have to feed it good quality data, and you have to put the guardrails in place. But you can, and when you do that, like in my example previously, where we said there might be 1,000 different applicants, and if you're just overwhelmed with these, maybe you take the top 100 or the top 50, and then you don't look at the rest. I think AI can, and if you do that, then you're missing out on maybe the other 900, and there might be somebody who's really good that you're missing because you kind of have to do it by hand. And so as AI is developing and trying to kind of as we're putting this in place, I think that you really do see a society. You can see a society that becomes more just and more fair in the way that we treat people, because you're able to highlight maybe a job seeker who really wouldn't have gotten a fair shake if maybe they came in person, and they're like, oh, I'm not sure about this person, or I'm not sure about this person. But if we can instead use these systems to say, actually, this person that you may have overlooked is the most qualified, is the person that you're looking for, and they might not fit your paradigm or what you think of as maybe a cultural fit, but they actually have the skills and the passion and all of the things maybe over and above people that you maybe find in your normal network. So I think that when I think about responsible AI and the opportunities out there, that's one of the things that I think is like, I'm not a doomsdayer. I don't think that AI is going to destroy us. I think that we have the ability to kind of go in and make changes to make us a better humanity. So that's the thing that excites me the most.
So I love that optimism. So it sounds like what you're saying is AI might force us to be more fair because it's taking systems right now where lazy humans are making decisions and we'll take shortcuts and we might have, because humans have tons of biases as well. But if we're actually transferring these into auditable models, then we might have more opportunity to be able to ensure that these, human biases don't get into our machines because we have more opportunity for auditing and oversight. And so hopefully the end product of this is that things will be more fair because we'll be more intentional about what we're doing. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we have the opportunity to really move society forward. Yeah, I think you summarized it pretty well.
That's awesome. Well, hey, I super appreciate your time today. This has been a fascinating conversation. I love stuff on responsible AI. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that you asked earlier about like how I got into responsible AI, and I think it's important. People can be intimidated by this, and there's actually more resources than ever in getting into responsible AI. And so, if you think about my path, I had product management experience, I had AI experience, and then I beefed up on responsible AI. It could be that maybe if one of these people listening are they're unsure and they're like, how do I get started? Think about what domain expertise you have today and where the gaps are. And I promise you that there is a pathway to getting closer and getting into the responsible AI field. You can do that through certificates. Stanford has good online learning. There's also, you can join groups in your area, or you can do it online. There's all kinds of people who can who can help you get on this journey. And so obviously this podcast is a great resource. But if anybody has any questions or they were curious about how to get into responsible AI, I'm happy to point them in the direction of places and resources that I've used. Just think about yourself and say, like, what am I? Maybe you're someone who's an ethicist, and you're really interested in these AI topics, but you've never built AI systems. You can learn how to do that, and there are definitely certificates online and other things that you can do, and then you can actually build from scratch. And I can point you in resources for that. But don't think this is a field that's too far ahead of you because it's brand new. You can actually get into this, and you can start where you are and take steps towards becoming a responsible AI PM, or developer, or data scientist, or researcher. And we need more people in the field that are passionate about this. We need more diverse perspectives as well.
That's super exciting. Thank you for that. Well, thank you. And I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. Have a great.
Thank you for joining us for the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity. Please remember to subscribe to ensure that you receive future episodes.